Session 4. Setting Assessments, Criteria 1 to 3. The whole of Module 2 is about the planning and setting of assessments. Session 4. Setting Assessments, Criteria 1 to 3. Now that you're familiar with the ICAS requirements for your specific subject or subjects, we can discuss the actual setting of assessments. Make sure that you have these listed documents before you begin the session: your subject guideline or syllabi, the relevant assessment guideline NCV programs, the latest ICAS guidelines, the latest ICAS templates, relevant subject textbooks, Department of Higher Education and Training document, a quick guide to the typing and editing of question papers and marking guidelines, and the workbook. A few points to remember. The name of the examiner and moderator for each task should be indicated on the assessment plan, and the plan should be in place in January of each new year before classes commence. Make sure that all examiners and moderators are subject experts. Even though all lecturers can moderate basic elements, not all lecturers are familiar with the content of all subjects. All the relevant documents and guidelines should be used when setting an assessment. There are specific criteria that must be understood so that an assessment can be evaluated and moderated to make sure that it is suitable. These will be discussed in detail. These 8 criteria are: Criterion 1, Analysis Grid; Criterion 2, Technical Criteria; Criterion 3, Content Coverage; Criterion 4, Cognitive Skills; Criterion 5, Types of Questions or Tasks; Criterion 6, Language and Bias; Criterion 7, Overall Impression; Criterion 8, Assessment Tool. Remember, this must not be just a checklist, but must guide the setting of assessments and tools. We will now examine the 8 criteria to be used when setting assessments. Let's start with Criterion 1, the Analysis Grid. I think this is the most hated section, and yet it is so extremely important. Go to your workbook and tackle Activity 5. Please pause the video now. If your analysis grid is correct, then your paper will comply with all the required elements. The analysis grid plays an important role in determining adherence to weighted values per topic, as determined by the various syllabi or subject assessment guidelines. Lecturers need to be fully aware of the weighted values per topic or module, as this will also indicate the importance placed on each topic or module when the subject is taught. Assessors and examiners need to adhere to these weighted values when setting a final paper. You will know that all cognitive levels have been covered, the time allocation is correct, and the mark allocations are correct. Thus, the paper is of the correct standard. The layout of the analysis grid for Report 191 programs and the NCV qualifications are only slightly different. Here is an analysis grid for Report 191 programs. And here's one from NCV programs. We will therefore first continue with the discussion of the other criteria before looking at a video on how to compile a detailed analysis grid. After that, we will complete a practical assessment on completing an analysis grid. If you look at the analysis grid for NCV qualifications, it should be clear that completing this grid correctly will help you comply with Criterion 3, 4, and 5. You will have the correct content coverage, cognitive levels, and types of questions. This brings us to Criterion 2, which is Technical Criteria. Before we analyze the technical criteria, let's have a look at another very important Department of Higher Education and Training document: a quick guide to the typing and editing of question papers and marking guidelines. Start by doing Activity 6. Please pause the video now. Some important aspects taken from the Department of Higher Education and Training document, a quick guide to the typing and editing of question papers and marking guidelines. What a correct cover page looks like. Instructions to candidates. Numbering and spacing in question papers. The wording and layout of matching item questions. The placement of marks in the paper. The use of hyphens and dashes. When to use italics. The phrasing of questions. Rules and hints with regard to diagrams. Rules and layout for multiple choice questions. The use of shells to ensure a neat paper. Do not neglect this section of the guide. Do not just tick a master copy and just change the date of the assessment every time. When you cut and paste questions, remember to change the numbering system. Let's look further at the subdivisions of the technical criteria. You should not tick the technical criteria as being correct if you have not checked them. Also, do not make a ticked master copy and then just change the date every time. Do you still remember how frustrated you were when a paper was full of mistakes or untidy? Neatness of papers plays a very important role in education. Check for a cover page. Good instructions. Good layout. Correct numbering. Page numbers. Suitable fonts. Good format. Correct mark allocation. Enough time for the paper. Formula and answer sheets are supplied. Drawings are suitable. Other illustrations are good. The paper must be checked before being sent to the moderator. And if necessary, a list of required materials must be supplied. Evidence that must be produced must be indicated, and the assessment must be cost-effective. It should be clear to you that this discussion of the DHET document will help you to make sure that you have adhered to the technical criteria. Look at this list of do's and don'ts. This can be very confusing. List of do's and don'ts. Make sure that questions are correctly numbered. Ensure correct mark allocations. Make sure that illustrations are of good quality. Give clear and correct instructions to the candidate. Do not tick the technical criteria as being correct if you did not really check it. Do not make a ticked master copy and then just change the date every time. Do not cut and paste from previous papers resulting in different fonts and wrong numbering. This can be very confusing. So let's have a look at a few typical mistakes using the questions on the screen. Firstly, when a question asks the student to list 3 facts, then it means that there must be 3 facts, counting 1 mark each. As indicated here, it means 1 fact with a mark allocation of 3 marks. In the next question, the poor student has to answer a 20-mark question. Mention is also the wrong word because technically speaking, it means that if the candidate writes down a 1-word answer, he or she should get 20 marks. The next question has a wrong mark allocation. Please make sure that if you ask a question for 4 facts of 2 marks each, then you also state in your question, discuss 4. Incorrect numbering is a huge problem in papers. Look at the example on the screen and make sure that you understand how to number questions. I refer you to the DHET document, Quick Guide to the Typing and Editing of Question Papers and Marking Guidelines, which states that there needs to be a 3.1 before questions 3.1.1 and 3.1.2 can be added. We need to have a special look at Technical Criterion 2.15. Remember that it is very important to have evidence for every mark recorded. Therefore, check this criterion very carefully to ensure that when a task is moderated, the evidence can be found. This is particularly important in practical tasks for example where candidates have to prepare food or demonstrate a skill. In such a case, a video can be made or photos can be taken. This then becomes your evidence for moderation purposes. Now please turn to your workbook and complete Activity 7. Please pause the video now. Please remember to give your feedback. Criterion 3 deals with content coverage. Would you like to be confronted with an assessment in which the weighted values are incorrect? The questions asked are not from the syllabi or subject assessment guidelines. The illustrations are either not clear or not relevant. The tasks call for very rigid answers with no option for creativity or opinion, or where facts are outdated. Do you think content coverage can be moderated if there is no analysis grid? Definitely not. Through moderation of Criterion 3, you will also ensure adherence to the syllabus or subject assessment guidelines with regard to both content and weighted values per topic or module. You should remember that content is not limited to a specific textbook, but to the relevant subject syllabus or subject assessment guidelines. Be creative. Although some syllabi are outdated, you should try to incorporate relevant and up-to-date developments in your respective subjects. Topics should be integrated and not asked in isolation. Let's look at Activity 8. Please pause the video now. This is the end of Session 4, Module 2. We looked at Criterion 1, the analysis grid, Criterion 2, technical criteria, and Criterion 3, content coverage.